Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 14 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, tonight we actually have part 2 of our discussion on biometrics and RFID with Pippa King. So Pippa will be joining us shortly. But something caught my eye during the course of the week, and it was obviously related to the title of this show, Humanity versus Insanity. Well, I'm sure a number of you saw this article in various papers, but this was from the Daily Mail. And President Blair's plan to save the EU. Now, personally, I can't think of anything more insane than even considering this socio-psychopath as the president of the EU. But those of you who are familiar with the presentation that I recorded in 2007 on Codex Alimentarius, when I was talking about the agenda to effectively eradicate all natural farming and abolish all natural health care, well, recall that back then I explained why it was that Tony Charles Lynton Blair had converted to Catholicism. The reason being that the EU is a Catholic entity. There is nothing Christian about the Catholic Church, as I'm sure many of you would agree. However, I would readily acknowledge, of course, that there are many good Christians within the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church itself is anything but Christian. And the EU is a Babylonian entity, and those of you who have attended my presentations over the past few years will know a little bit more about why I make that observation. Unfortunately, tonight I don't have the opportunity or the time to really get into that detail. But the purpose of Blair converting to Catholicism was so that he could be considered as a candidate for the presidency of the EU. And of course, his wet dream was to become the first president of the EU to go down in history as the EU inaugural president. But that wasn't to be, because it was too soon, because the ruling elite know very well that Blair will do whatever he's told. They have him right where they want him. This is a sociopath that considers human life to be totally expendable, as of course he has proven on numerous occasions, not least, of course, after his literal sucking up to George W. Bush and stating that he would do whatever it was, basically, that George told him to do. And here he is. Here's a bit more of the article. Tony Blair tells Germany's Merkel he will defend Europe from the far right. You know what? I can't think of actually any politician who masquerades as representing the left that is more right-wing than this socio-psychopath. If anyone really wants to take a look at how this guy is regarded in the UK, they've only got to look at the comments on the various mainstream news pages that ran this story. This is, I nearly said the word man, but this is an entity that basically cannot go out in public in the UK. So whilst he is revered by his fellow socio-psychopaths, humanity finds this entity to be disgusting. And that is pretty much the common perception across the UK. So anyone who happens to be part of the diplomatic community and has the ear of people in the EU, you need to know that any consideration of this guy becoming the president will not be tolerated. And actually, if you want to accelerate the departure of the UK from the EU, then please go ahead and appoint this guy, because then everyone will know that the EU represents everything that the UK despises. But just to show that the life or human life is held in disregard, Blair and, would you believe, Alistair Campbell have apparently been providing advice and guidance in Egypt right now to the military coup that has recently taken place there. Meanwhile, of course, Blair demonstrating his absolute lack of transparency was more recently in the news again for ensuring that the emails that Blair sent or exchanged with George W. Bush in the run-up to the Iraq War are kept away from the Chilcot inquiry. So here we have an article that appeared in the Daily Mail just last week. And actually, this is an article that I'm sure even Patrick Henningsen would have been proud of. I mean, this is an article that is really straight out of the alternative media. And it's asking the question, and we all know the answer, is Sir Cover-Up more powerful than the PM? And of course, this refers to Sir Jeremy Haywood, the Cabinet Secretary. And I won't spoil the story for you, but do some research into Jeremy Haywood. Have a look at his connections, his wife's connections, and some of the things that he has been involved in, some of the advice that he has given to David Cameron and George Gordon Brown, and also to Tony Blair. And you will see that this individual is anything but impartial. So why is this article run in the mainstream media? Because basically the establishment can give the British public the finger. The establishment know damn well that the British public are not going to react. So by putting it out there in the public domain, they cannot be accused of covering it up. There it is. It's blatant. It's in the media. It's a cover-up. We all know it's a cover-up. And the reality is that now it's out there, nobody's going to do anything about it. So the Chilcot report is, as everybody knew it would be, another whitewash. At what point does humanity really reach breaking point? Where does it say enough of this insanity? So even the Daily Mail, actually in the editorial comment, makes an observation here. It's sorry, I've got technology let me down. It's a new computer and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. No, I think we've there we go. Hopefully that will come up on screen now. So much for live TV, huh? The Daily Mail comment: shine a light on this unaccountable clique. Shadowy, secretive, never held to account. He is the political fixer the BBC calls the most important person in the country that nobody has ever heard of. Today, increasingly unsettling questions are being raised about the role and influence of Britain's most powerful Mandarin, Sir Jeremy Haywood. So, based on what's occurring, it would seem to be pretty obvious that Jeremy Haywood is actually running the country. It wasn't Tony Blair, it wasn't Gordon Brown, or indeed David Cameron. And in fact, David Cameron has been rumoured to ask Jeremy Haywood the question. Jeremy, help me out here, because I'm a little bit confused. Do I work for you or do you work for me? Well, the reality is, Mr. Cameron, you clearly work for Jeremy Haywood. So yet more evidence that we are in an ersatz democracy here in the UK. Anyway, enough. I will leave you to do your own research into the machinations of Jeremy Haywood and his efforts to keep the numerous, multiple, hundreds, whatever collective you want to use, emails that George Bush and Tony Blair exchanged before the invasion of Iraq away from the Chilcot inquiry, so that the truth is never known, and no doubt they'll have a 200-year order put on them. Meanwhile, let's get more up to date. This is the second show that I've done since AV5. And I pre-recorded last week's show as I was planning to be at Crawberry Hill, more of which on Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock. So I pre-recorded the show, but I did mention that Greg Nikolettos had unfortunately had a turn for the worse whilst he was at AV5. And Greg was unable to give his presentation Let me tell you that I have seen that presentation. I've seen the slides that he produced. I've seen the video footage that he'd incorporated into that presentation, and it is absolute dynamite. But it's Greg's work, and it is for Greg to present. Now, at Greg's request, that presentation is now in multiple places. So if anything untoward should occur, that material will be put into the public domain. Greg was arrested at AV5 following an incident that occurred early on the Sunday morning. But due to Greg's mental state, he was given the benefit of being treated under the Mental Health Act, which means that there are certain protocols that are observed which might not otherwise be observed if he was being held under the pretext of a criminal act. Greg was effectively issued with a Section 2. This is a 28-day section order, and Greg was initially held in a private hospital in Northampton. He was subsequently transferred to a National Health Hospital in the Northampton area, where he remains at present. He has contacted a legal team in the UK, and tomorrow afternoon there will be a tribunal to review whether or not that 28-day section order is terminated, is upheld, or indeed extended. So I don't want to predict the outcome. There are many aspects of this which are actually unknown to me, but I will be present. I will be, at Greg's request, I will be an observer at that tribunal tomorrow afternoon, and once that tribunal is completed, then I will give an update, video bulletin, and post on various media outlets, particularly Facebook, of the outcome of that tribunal. Obviously, it is my desire that Greg has the opportunity to return home, because he's 12,000 miles away from home. Obviously, he has no family or relatives here in the UK. So in the ideal situation, we will find a way to get Greg back into his home environment and to have the support of his immediate family. So I really can't say any more than that at the moment. Like I said, there's many aspects of this that I'm not aware of, and so there's a lot of, I know there's a lot of conjecture going on there, but I would ask that you avoid the conjecture until such time as the facts are properly known. Meanwhile, I hope that you'll join me in wishing Greg a very speedy recovery, and hopefully a speedy return home, and hopefully he will be back into full health and be able to present the material that he had prepared for AV5. There is one aspect of this case, though, that I do find particularly disturbing. Greg was due to fly from Brisbane to the UK on the Tuesday before the AV5 weekend. The ideal being, obviously, to give him time to recover from the jet lag before participating in the weekend. When he landed in Dubai, a series of incidents occurred. Greg actually was arrested in Dubai. He was held in Dubai. But also in Dubai, Greg tells me that he met a random individual who happened to be a former Homeland Security officer who had previously worked in the field of the microchipping agenda. Now, forgive me, but I find it extremely unlikely that Greg would have landed at Dubai and coincidentally met a random individual with a background in the microchipping who worked for Homeland Security. So there are some aspects of this that give me some pretty serious cause for concern. But beyond that, I don't want to speculate, but I do want that information to be out there. So let's see how this unfolds, and more tomorrow evening after the tribunal. Now, it's very appropriate that we should be continuing the discussion with Pippa King tonight, because what we're really building up to with the discussions on biometrics and RFID with Pippa is we're building up to where Greg is at in terms of his insights into the deeper aspects of this global agenda. So Pippa, are you there online with us?
Hello, good evening.
Hello, Pippa?
Hello, good evening.
Hello,
Can you hear
I
me?
can't hear you. Let's try that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and I can hear you. Excellent. It seems that the technology gremlins are playing with me tonight. Anyway, obviously last week we started the discussion on biometrics in schools, and I know you have an enormous amount of material, and I know we've got a lot that you want to cover, and I want to reiterate that there's no need to rush. This is a very, very important subject. And although we committed to 3 weeks of talking on these subjects with you, we can always extend it to 4, because I think it's absolutely crucial that people begin to realize just how this agenda is infiltrating on their daily lives, and particularly with the younger generation. So it's normalizing something that people of my generation in particular would find absolutely abhorrent.
It is. It's certainly having the effect of desensitising children to biometrics and RFID. But just to give a bit of background, the UK started fingerprinting children in schools with biometric scanners for library books back in 2001. And the Information Commissioner's Office in the Department of Education had no problem with the particular company that was doing it at the time. They thought it wasn't going to breach the data protection. So we've been doing this in schools for 13 years now. And the way that I got involved was when my 2 kids, when they were 6 and 7 years old at a primary school, I spotted the fingerprint scanner in the library and asked the head teacher, when she was going to ask for permission from me to take my children's biometrics, of course, which I wouldn't give. And so I asked the question, and she just said, I don't need your permission. I can fingerprint them without your consent. And she was right. The Data Protection Act in the UK allows biometric information from children to go into databases without parental consent, or it did. And through the course of 2006 to 2010, myself and other parents and privacy groups, Privacy International, Action on Rights for Children, No to ID, lobbied Parliament for a change in the law, at the very least to inform parents or gain consent for parents. And because, long story short, we were successful, and in the Protection of Freedoms Act, we have in there 3 clauses which deals with children and biometrics used in education. But during the course of this, I sort of looked to the United States to see what's happening over there. And so I have been in touch with parents over there in the past, and it's quite prolific in the United States, in certain school districts. And we spoke about this last week. There was a bill, SB 188, which was passed in Florida, actually banning biometrics in schools. The bill hit the Senate in November, and it got passed in May this year. During the course of February, a new biometrics association sprung out of Washington, D.C. called SIBA, S-I-B-A.
Yeah, well, I think we have a screen grab from their website here. So we just pull that up on screen. There we have.
And that's the Security Industry and Biometrics Association. Their website is very bland. It talks about members of the industry joining and promoting biometrics in schools, basically. Their drive is a drive called Kickstart, which is on one of their, I think it's publications tab. And on there, they actually sort of state that schools need our help. It's convenient that this has come out of Washington, D.C., in the period that, actually it was in the very same month when the Senate bill in Florida got a virtual 100% yay and for banning biometrics in schools. So we just wondered where SIBA had come from. And so, because they seem very keen to dispel any myths about biometrics in schools. And I'm sure as a technology, biometric technology is very good and does authenticate people. Personally, and I know I'm not the only one that thinks like this, that it is not appropriate to use it with children in schools. One of the events CIBA is having is a closed-door event with 2 speakers, one of which is Alan Bursin, who is Acting Assistant Secretary for Policy to the US Department of Homeland Security and Vice President for the Americas Interpol. And the other speaker is a guy called Bob Mockney, who is Director in the Office of Biometric Management, again part of the US Department of Homeland Security. So, and it's a closed-door event, so it's not going to be public. There's going to be no webinars anybody can see. And so it's not boding well for transparency when this organisation from Washington, D.C. is promoting biometrics in schools with people like this from Homeland Security speaking to industry, or I don't know who they're speaking to. It's a closed-door event, and trying to, I guess, promote the agenda of biometrics in schools.
So you heard me, Pippa, so you heard me, I'm sure, just talking about Greg's experience in Dubai, where he ran into this random individual who happened to have an interest in RFID and biometrics, and Greg ran into him in Dubai, where, unfortunately, of course, Greg went missing for 2.5 days. So on the basis of what you know about Homeland Security's interest in RFID and biometrics, do you think that that meeting between Greg and that individual in Dubai was coincidental?
I don't think it was coincidental. It's interesting because I always thought government have always, certainly in the UK, stepped back from this agenda. In the US, I can't say that I've seen government push this agenda. I have asked CIBA how they're funded, where the concept was formed and by who, and who their members are, which none of this is on their website. They just sprung up out of nowhere, and they haven't let me know, they haven't given me that information. So it's looking like it's a US government-led initiative, which is driving the agenda here, certainly with biometrics, using biometrics in schools in the US. I have no evidence to suggest that the UK government is pushing this agenda in schools, but they're certainly not. That they have stepped back completely from the whole event by not knowing how many children have been fingerprinted, not knowing which schools are doing it. They haven't even checked the technology. I sent them a freedom of information request asking them, have you looked at the technology? Have you looked at the companies? And the answer was no, they haven't. They have no idea. They're distancing themselves hugely from what's going on in the UK. But it has been interesting to see this association spring up in light of what's happened in Florida.
Well, then we've got an item from the Chicago Tribune, which of course is the other end of the country, from Florida.
I was going to say, going back to the bill where they banned biometrics in schools in Florida actually was part of a bill that was dealing with what's an education initiative over there called Common Core. And Common Core has been very controversial. I don't know enough about it to talk too much here. But the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have put about £4 billion into this initiative.
So hang on a second, let's say that again. Who has put £4 million into this?
Oh, sorry, $4 billion.
$4 billion? $4 billion?
It's billion or million. I think I read billion, but it does seem like an excessive amount.
Yeah, $4 billion. Well, it wouldn't surprise me. And it's Bill and Belinda Gates. Okay, well, that should have everyone's alarm bells going off big time.
Well, this is where this next article comes in, because part of Common Core's idea when it first got mooted was that they would use biometric bracelets on students to test how the teachers were teaching, whether or not they were alert, the students were alert, and that this was part of the agenda. I mean, as far as I know, this particular initiative didn't happen, but I haven't seen any evidence of that biometric bracelet initiative happen. But this is what's behind, this agenda in schools is to try and get biometrics in there as much as possible. But when I was looking at this just over the weekend to see if there had been any evidence of this biometric wearing of bracelets, I came up with a report from the US Department of Education, which is the next slide, Ian, which was a report promoting grit, tenacity and perseverance, critical factors of success in the 21st century. And this is a fairly large document detailing, I haven't read it all, it came on my awareness this weekend, but certainly part of the document on page 44, which is the next slide, is to monitor children in education biometrically by facial expression cameras, posture analysis seats, pressure mouses and wireless skin conductance sensors to see how they're reacting in class to different things. I mean, the article goes on page 45 to say as well that, you know, really the United States Department of Education would like to MRI scan children as they're having lessons. This is the next slide, Ian.
Before you just go on to the next slide there, Pippa, one of the things that strikes me, going back to the Chicago Tribune article, where it says the biometric bracelets produced by a Massachusetts startup company, Affectiva Inc., send a small current across the skin and then measure subtle changes in electrical charges as the sympathetic nervous system responds to stimuli. So consequently, they're able to effectively real-time measure the level of concentration that that student is applying. Now, let me extrapolate this as per the socio-psychopathic thought process. Because, you know, if I look at what's going on in Belgium, where at the complete other end of the spectrum, we have legislation that permits the Belgian medical profession to euthanize seriously ill children. You know, with everything that's occurring right now, how many generations, and unfortunately it's not probably too many, how many generations before we reach a point where the global corporatists are effectively monitoring the students with a view to ultimately terminating those that they don't feel can contribute to their corporatist agenda?
Well, it's certainly reading like something from 1984 or Brave New World with this. You could certainly go down that road with it, I think. But what's just occurred to me that I hadn't really thought of earlier was that that bracelet must have an RFID sensor in it in order for it to communicate then with a remote device gathering the information. So again, it's that softening up of ubiquitous technology that we're not consciously interacting with. Unlike biometrics, where you do have to make a conscious effort to guide your own thumb to a finger scanner, this sort of taking of biometrics, like the facial expression cameras and the seats that you sit in, it's monitoring you as you're doing your daily life, and there's no conscious interaction with the technology at that point. So this is where certainly the US Education Department would like to see the technology going. I was just going on to say that what it actually detailed on the next page after this was the fact that they would really like to use MRI scanners on the kids in education to check how they're learning. But actually, this is the next slide, Ian. I think this is page 45. It says, one of the reasons why they're not using MRI scanners, it says, while it's impractical to use MRI in the classroom, i.e. it is prohibitively expensive and a room-sized machine. And again, apart from anything else, it's a frequency, it's a magnetic frequency. It can't be great for children to be permanently MRI scanned, I'd have thought. So that's where it's sort of going on a US side of things. Coming back to the UK, we have the Protection of Freedoms Act now that was brought in 2012 and was actually enforceable in September 2013. So as of last September, we're just in the first school year of parents and children ever being asked and consulted about biometrics in schools. There's been a little bit of advice from government, some template letters, but basically what I've been in contact with parents from around the UK is that schools have been sending out materials to parents to try and get them to physically sign a consent form that have been supplied by the manufacturers or the vendors of the machinery. So there's been a fair amount of spin that's gone out, really, with the consent letters. So it's difficult to sort of see. I mean, I think there's only my website on the internet, my Biometrics in Schools blog, that I started in 2006. Talking about my particular journey and how we as parents, stayed in touch with each other, and different articles that came up in the press. When I first started writing it in 2006, I just thought, nobody's going to be interested in this. It'll never catch on, and so I just wrote away. And now, 65,000 words later, I'm probably the only internet on the internet, the website on the internet that solely concentrates on this particular issue. But just going back to the UK, we did some freedom of information requests in 2007 to try and find out how many schools were using this in the UK, because the government had no figures whatsoever. And so we just had to send individual schools, these as parents, we sent individual schools freedom of information requests to see how prolific it was. And I think back in about 2007, we did a rough guesstimate that about 2.7 million children were using biometrics in education. We have a school population in the UK of 9.2, something like that, million children.
That's just under a third.
Yes, just under a third. But I think about 30, it was just under a third. And Big Brother Watch brought a report out earlier on this year in January that sort of played the figures down a little bit, unfortunately. They sent a freedom of information request out to over 1,200 schools and only got a 39% response from the schools, which is in itself is very poor, because schools are legally obliged under that act to give you the information you ask for. And so they processed that data and put a figure out, sort of over 1 million kids fingerprinted in the past year, which really means nothing. Because when I was working on the Protection of Freedoms Bill, I wanted to write a report for the Bill Committee, how prolific it was in education. So I sent out 500 freedom of information requests and had a 47% response rate, which was really poor. And so I couldn't process any data from the responses because I didn't know how accurate it was, given the fact that less than half the schools had responded. But out of interest, I ran around the schools in Liverpool. I had a very, I can't remember the response rate I got, but the response rate I got for the schools in Liverpool indicated that 25% of the schools were using biometrics. When I rang round the rest of the schools that hadn't answered the freedom of information request, that figure rose to 79% of schools that were using freedom of information, that were using biometrics, and that hadn't responded. So significantly, the proportion of schools that aren't responding, I think, are using biometrics. So any figures that you see that are coming from freedom of information requests that haven't got a good sort of response rate are not, I would say, questionable. But sort of working on that, their response to what they got of how many schools were using biometrics, I calculated that if the schools that hadn't responded were the same rate that the Liverpool schools were when I did this back in 2010, that the figure of school children in the UK that were using biometrics would have risen to 6.5 million, which is quite steep. That's now 2/3 of the children that are using biometrics. But actually, I think the question and the point that needs to be made is not particularly how many children are using it, but how many children are experiencing it. So if the majority of biometric systems, 79% of systems in Liverpool are in secondary schools, which they are, that means that it doesn't matter if children aren't experiencing biometrics at primary school. When they hit secondary, they'll hit biometric technology. So that means that when these children leave, by the time these children leave education, if we go by the Liverpool standard, that means nearly 8 out of 10 children will have experienced biometrics. So it's not particularly the quantity of children that have got their biometric data on a database. I think personally it's the hit of that 80% of children leaving education that have got biometrics, or experienced biometrics. So can
I just stop you there, because this is a couple of slides that you gave to me last week, and this is HSBC ads, and it says in the future your DNA will be your data. Well, of course, you or I walk past that and immediately sort of go in your dreams, but the reality is, of course, that those young people that have effectively been introduced to this through their secondary school experience will consider this to be normal.
Yes, indeed. They will. They will have used it at school. And it's interesting, when the iPhone 5 came out, there was sort of chatter on the internet, and the children were sort of saying, "Oh, this is great. This is just like what we're using at school." And so what I know, when we campaigned in Parliament, No to ID and Phil Booth, who's brilliant help, were very concerned that at the time it would desensitize the next generation to biometrics, and it has.
Yeah.
It has done that. So,
well, even my laptop actually has facial recognition. I mean, funnily enough, I've completely disabled that. But you actually have a feature where the laptop won't function unless it recognises the facial features. You know, I have a bit of masking tape actually over my lens here. Because obviously, as we discussed last week, I think, I mean, Facebook's new Messenger app literally states that when you sign up for it, you give Facebook free access to pretty much anything and everything. And I gather that it's actually been established that they can even access posts that you don't send.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's just if you try and keep your face off those applications as much as possible. I think that's got to be prudent, really, because the facial recognition, this is what we were saying last week, is in Tesco forecourts now. The detection, not the recognition. The recognition part is when it can ID you as a person. I think the detection is just the fact that it can see your gender and ethnicity and your age. But it is quite prolific, but we don't have any signage here in the UK that warns people when they're going into an area that has facial detection in it. And I think it should, because then we can make a choice. At the moment, we don't know how we're being scanned, by our face, by our gait, how we walk. Again, the technology has sort of gone further than the laws of the land. This is what we had with the biometrics. So, I mean, I personally would like to see signage alongside any CCTV or IPTV. But going back to the Protection of Freedoms Bill, it was fantastic when that was signed into law. And in the May of 2012, I actually sort of sat back for about 5 months and thought, wow, you know, that was a good sort of 7-year experience for me. I'm a piano teacher by trade. I know nothing about altering laws or biometric technology. I taught myself. I educated myself on it because it was going to affect my children and
so you have actually demonstrated what one person can achieve with the appropriate tenacity and focus.
Yes, I got really mad that a school could take my child or any child's biometrics, put it on a database, and parents have no clue, and the child really have no sort of idea about what's happening. They're in a compliance situation. They do what they're told at school, and I just got really mad about it and stayed really mad for a number of years. I'm still annoyed about it. I don't think it's an appropriate technology to be in schools, and I'm really welcoming the fact that Florida have banned the technology until at least a time when, you know, we know more about it, we know how secure it's going to be in decades' time. Will the children's biometrics still in 20, 30 years' time be as secure as they are now? I don't know, because certainly in the 10 years that I've experienced technology, the advancement of the technology has been quite huge.
Now, Pippa, we're running into the sort of final moments of this week's show. And so next week we're going to be focusing on the step from biometrics into RFID. So do you just want to give us an intro, a little taster for what we're going to be discussing next week with RFID, and particularly how this has impacted in the UK, and again, your success in getting this shut down in the UK?
Yeah, when I was looking at biometrics, I looked at the States to see what was happening over there. This was back in 2005-06, and there wasn't really much happening in the States with biometrics, but what was happening was RFID tagging. And there was a particular school in California that had put active transmitting chips around their students' necks as a trial. And I was in touch with one of the parents there, so it very early on became, I was aware of this in the agenda of things in education. And so, yes, next week we'll be talking about that because it's happened twice in the UK, not widely reported. But there's so many issues to do with RFID that biometrics don't really cover. We've got a horrendous loss of privacy, the unknown health implications of wearing a radio frequency device, and the cost and these things don't turn off when you walk out the school. You take those frequencies with you on the bus, you take them into your home, you take them, and again, it's this silent, unconscious use of technology, but that's what we'll be looking at next week.
Okay, so obviously this is an all-pervasive technology. I mean, once again, it's desensitizing the younger generation so that when they actually go out into the world of the corporates and become a slave to the corporatocracy, they are ready then for not just wearing a badge with maybe a magnetic strip that enables them to access the premise, but actually a full-blown RFID tracking chip which monitors their every single movement.
Indeed, this has already happened in a school in the UK. And there's no turning the chip off when a child goes to a toilet or is in a shower. You've got data protection implications about when they go to see a school nurse, or if they go to a political, if this is in a college, if they want to attend a political meeting of some sort. This starts to encroach and breach, I think, the Data Protection Act, because the school's then processing sensitive information about those individuals. And I mean, we've all probably watched a little bit of Big Brother on the television. After a few hours, people forget that they're being watched and they start to behave, well, normally, if you can call it normal behaviour on Big Brother. But this is the same thing. You're not always consciously aware you're wearing it. But one of the first things that sprang to mind when I learned about this was, my goodness, wouldn't it be easy to play truancy? Because you're just going to give your friend a tag. You can go off school premises, and essentially the school think you're still there. So in actual fact, there's safeguarding issues as well around this sort of technology on that sort of practical level. So there's really lots of issues to talk about if you're going to start encouraging children to wear microchips.
Well, then you see that the next stage is once it becomes apparent that the children are passing the various RFID tags around each other so that they're not wearing them, then of course the case will be made for the implant. Which is not so easy for them to hand off. But look, we've reached the end of this week's episode of Humanity versus Insanity. So shall we play out, Pippa, with the video that you've sent through to me from West Cheshire?
Yes, this was a promotional video by a company called Zebra Technologies, who are based in the USA. They supplied West Cheshire College with over 5,500 RFID active tags that were transmitting ultra-wideband radio frequencies from each child up to 100 metres around them, so they could triangulate that child's position. This was a promotional video that was on Zebra Technologies' website. And it has the school as its main feature, and one part of it, about 3/4 of the way through, you'll see a screenshot of green blobs moving about the screen, almost like a Harry Potter's Marauder map, and that's how they were monitoring the kids.
Okay, so before we show it, I mean, let's just make the point that you were instrumental in getting this particular project shut down and effectively embarrassing the school and Zebra Technologies, so that this at least is now off the table, at least for the time being, in the UK. But until you came along and expressed your deep concerns, this was what was effectively being trialled in a West Cheshire school in the UK. So watch this video and we'll continue the discussion next week. See you then. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Pippa.
Hi, I'm Kevin Francis. I'm the Building Services Manager for West Cheshire College. We're a vocational college from the northwest of England. We provide vocational education and training to enable our learners to go on to further and higher education opportunities. And that, in a nutshell, means that we can offer real experience of work through doing rather than talking about it. We believe that we can offer learners the opportunity of the actual job before they go into the world of work. We have over 20,000 students per year, and we deliver courses to allow students to access learning at a pace and time to suit them. And it's part of our funding regulation to make sure that we record their location accurately. So we need to really measure our use of the buildings to make sure that we look for efficiency. The solution we had before involves the use of many manual registers, which can sometimes be paper-based, coupled with use of an electronic register system. And that solution has its own pitfalls because it really relies on the staff member remembering to take that register. We've implemented a solution now within the college with Zebra to enable us really to effectively track and monitor the location of all staff and students within the building. That includes a number of receivers and sensors, and they pick up on the location tag and triangulate that position within the building. The actual tags themselves are issued to students and enrolment. We use a graphical interface to display the information that Zebra provides to the system, and that overlay of information on a physical map of the college. So it's really intuitive. And one of those chief benefits for us is going to be around efficiency savings. So we're able to look at our data in a different way, and that will really feed into our planning process to ensure that we use our buildings in a really efficient way. And for the health and safety purposes, we always make sure that we're able to query our information of who's on site and who isn't on site on a particular day. Zebra have been excellent really from day one with us. Their capacity to deliver the service has been exemplary. They've invited us to participate in the development of the solutions for the college, and I think that's really important for us. I can absolutely recommend their customer service and their knowledge into our organisation. It's allowed us to really move on and move forward in our organisation.